name's Seth, and I just want to welcome you to church online today. Especially if this is your first time joining us, we want to extend a warm welcome to you. As we do encourage you, if you get a chance sometime this morning, to take advantage of the prayer request button down at the bottom of your screen, as we'd love to know we can be praying for you over the course of this next week. Before we get too into worship, there are just a few announcements wanted to highlight before we get too into things. First being is last week, we launched Starting Point Online. Come on, somebody. This is really a great opportunity if you've ever been interested in discovering a little bit more about who we are as a church, or just interested in ways to get more connected within the local church. This is a great course to consider taking. And you can check it out by going to walport4.org/start or newport4.org/start as well. And there was a reason why we launched it when we did, because next weekend is our State of the Church business meeting. Come on, who is not excited for that? All right, okay, yeah, I hear some crickets out there, but it really is a great time. As this is a time where we get together once a year, really just hear a little bit about where we've been as a church and where we're going. And so I really do encourage you, if you can attend in person, that would be great. We'd love to have you. It's going to be happening right after service at Newport on the 13th, and Waldport in between services, between our 9 and 11 a.m. Service. We're going to be having that meeting then as well. And if you can't totally understand, we're going to work on making sure that we have the information available for you online to watch at a later date and time as well. So, hey, with that, again, can't thank you enough for joining us this morning, as right now I think it's time to turn the volume up and let's get our worship on today.
Sound coming on the wind, changing hearts and minds, healing brokenness. I feel a generation breaking through despair. I hear a generation full of faith declare, and our song it will the darkness we will rise and sing. He is faithful, He is glorious, and He is Jesus. All my hope is in Him. He is freedom, He is healing right now. He is hope and joy, love and peace and light. I have seen a light like a break of dawn, giving blind men sight and letting lame men walk. I see a generation, resurrection life. We are a generation filled with the power of Christ, and our song it will be. Out of the darkness we will rise and sing. Jesus breathless, all in wonder, King of glory, King above all kings. This is amazing grace. This is unfailing love. That you would take my place, that you would bear my cross. You lay down your life, that I would be set free. Jesus, I sing for all that you've done for me. Who breaks your chaos back into order? Who makes us orphan, son and daughter? King of glory, King above all kings. Who rules the nations, truth and justice, shines like the sun in all of its brilliance. King of glory, King above all kings. This is amazing grace. This is unfailing love. That you would take my place, that you would bear my cross. You would lay down your life, that I would be set free. Oh, Jesus, I sing for all that you've done for me. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain. Worthy is the King who conquers the grave. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain. Worthy is the King who conquers the grave. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain. Worthy is the King who conquers the grave. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain. Worthy, worthy, worthy. Oh, this is amazing grace. This is unfailing love. That you would take my place, that you would bear my cross. You would lay down your life, that I would be set free. Oh, Jesus, I sing for all that you've done for me. Jesus, I sing for all that you've done for me. I was buried beneath my shame. Who could carry that kind of weight? It was my tomb till I met you. I was breathing but not alive. All my failures I tried to hide. It was my tomb till I met you. You called my name. I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness to your glorious day. You called my name. I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness to your glorious day. Now your mercy has saved my soul. Now your freedom is all that I know. The old made new. Jesus, when I met you, you called my name. I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness, to your glorious day. You called my name. I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness, to your glorious day. I needed rescue, my sin was heavy. Chains break out the weight of your glory. Needed shelter, I was an orphan. You called me a citizen of heaven. When I was broken, you were my healing. Your love is the air that I'm breathing. I have a future, my eyes are open. When you call my name, I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness, to your glorious day. You called my name. I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness, to your glorious day.
That'd be awesome. My name is Greg Stranigan, and I've known Seth and Holly for a number of years now, and it's always my privilege to come and share with you guys. I'm a pastor in Portland. Don't hold that against me. And I'm also a chaplain at an assisted living facility, and I'm a hospice chaplain. So other than that, I have nothing to do. And my wife, Shawn, is she's back at where we're staying because she had her second COVID vaccine on Thursday. She felt awesome yesterday. Today, not so much. So if you could keep her in prayer, she's and I understand that she's got rheumatoid arthritis, so she's got joint pain. She feels queasy, and those are two of the most common symptoms of and supposedly that means the vaccine is doing its job, right? So anyway, just keep her in prayer because she's not feeling so hot. And I came across this. This is 15 Things It Took Me Over 30 Years to Learn by Dave Barry, who's a humor columnist. And some of these are, I thought they were pretty good. He says, for example, never under any circumstances take a sleeping pill and a laxative on the same night. If you had to identify in one word the reason why the human race has not achieved and never will achieve its full potential, that word would be meetings. He says there's a very fine line between hobby and mental illness. And this one is actually really good, I think. You should not confuse your career with your life. Nobody cares if you can't dance well, just get up and dance. This is a practical one here. Never lick a steak knife. The most destructive force in the universe is gossip. You'll never find anybody who can give a clear and compelling reason why we observe daylight savings time. Which is next weekend, just so you know. So, we're going to lose an hour's sleep, so you might want to be storing up this week. I appreciate this one. You should never say anything to a woman that even remotely suggests that you think she's pregnant, and yes, unless you see an actual baby emerging from her at that moment. There comes a time when you should stop expecting people to make a big deal about your birthday. That time is age 11. I think this one's also true. A person who is nice to you but rude to the waiter is not a nice person. He says, this is very important. Pay attention. It never fails. This one is true, and I like this one. Your friends love you anyway. And never be afraid to try something new. Remember that a lone amateur built the Ark. A large group of professionals built the Titanic. I'm going to take a look at the Sermon on the Mount, which is not the whole thing, just part of it, because the Sermon on the Mount is considered, even by most non-Christians, to be the highest ethical teaching in the history of the human race. And I think the pinnacle, the apex of the Sermon on the Mount is what I want to talk about, where Jesus said, love your enemies. Now, I always figured that, unless you have some enemies to practice on, how are you going to do that? But that's, if there's any one statement that Jesus made in the eyes of the world, that sums up what the Christian faith is supposed to be like. Love your enemies. Will Durant, who is a philosopher and a scholar, said, without question, Jesus set the highest ethic in the history of mankind. But too bad nobody ever lived up to it. See, if love is the greatest thing, and the Bible teaches that it is, then loving your enemies is the greatest thing love can do. And so the highest example of us living in the kingdom should be found in this concept of loving our enemies. And so I want to take some time and unpack this, especially given the historical, cultural context of when Jesus mentioned this, because it really was and still remains radical. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is talking to people who thought that they were good enough. The scribes and the Pharisees, they thought, I haven't killed anyone, I haven't slept with my neighbor's wife. The scribes and the Pharisees were the most religious people of their day. And Jesus points out that murder begins with hatred, and adultery begins with lust. In other words, he raises the bar from just external behavior to internal motivation. And so now we come to what Jesus has to say about the subject of love. This is what he says in Matthew 5, verse 43. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Now, notice how Jesus introduces what he has to say. You've heard that it was said. That's a reference to current rabbinic teaching of the day. And what is it? Love your neighbor and hate your enemy. In other words, you've been taught that there's justification for hatred. You've been taught that your pride is justifiable and your prejudice is okay. So the first thing to do is figure out who your neighbor is, and then you can hate everybody else and be okay. Haters going to be haters, right? See, if you can define, you can hate up a storm depending on how you define neighbor. If you define your neighbor as your spouse and your three best friends, you can hate the whole world. So, look at the first part. Love your neighbors. So far, so good. Where did they get that? Well, the Old Testament. Leviticus 19, verse 18, to be precise. Love your neighbor as yourself. The Old Testament says that very clearly. But did you notice what they left out? Love your neighbor is what they were taught, not love your neighbor as yourself. Now, why did they omit that? Well, think about it. If they had to treat others as equal to themselves, well, that's way too difficult. So they dropped it. Have you ever thought what it means to love somebody as yourself? If you just were to love people without that qualifier, you could sort of love them at a distance. You could treat them a little less than you treat yourself. But beyond that, not only did they omit something, but they added something. What did they add? Hate your enemy. See, where does the Bible command us to hate our enemies? That's a trick question. You can look for it all you want, you're not going to find it because it's not there. Nowhere in the Bible does God command us to hate our enemies. So where did they come up with that, these religious scholars and authorities? Well, it was a logical extension of their thinking. Okay, we're supposed to love our neighbor. Now let's define who our neighbor is, okay? So they said, well, our neighbors are the Jews. Definitely the Jews. Most definitely not the Gentiles. Only the Jews qualified, And even then, only certain Jews, right? Tax collectors, well, they were despised because they'd sold out to Rome for money. And then there were sinners and prostitutes and such. So neighbor was popularly defined back then as Jews who weren't tax collectors or sinners. And if you didn't qualify as a neighbor, then you're out. So here's how their argument went. The Bible says love your neighbor. Therefore, someone who's not your neighbor is not to be loved. Then the opposite of love is hate. Loving your neighbor means you can hate your enemy. That's what they thought. But Jesus cuts across all those mental gymnastics by what he says next. Matthew 5, verse 44. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And again, that's probably the apex of the Bible's teaching on loving others. The Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 13 put it this way: the greatest thing is love. And Jesus elaborates on what it means to love. And this is probably the ultimate contrast between his standards in the kingdom and the conventional wisdom of the day. The Pharisees and teachers of the law thought that because they didn't commit murder, they were okay. But Jesus just devastates their thinking. And when he said we're to love our enemies, I believe that's probably the most powerful statement in the New Testament about the meaning of love. But part of the problem is that they defined neighbor far too narrowly. In Luke chapter 10, a lawyer came to Jesus and he asked this question: what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And so being a lawyer, he wanted a definition of neighbor. And he asked the next question: who is my neighbor? You want me to love my neighbor? Who is it? And again, Jesus didn't tell him the cultural, the neighbors are just Jews that aren't tax collectors or sinners. Instead, Jesus said, let me tell you a story. And he proceeded to tell the parable of the Good Samaritan, where a man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho. He got attacked, beat up, robbed, and was left for dead, lying on the side of the road. A priest came by, but when he saw the victim, this religious leader passed by on the other side, because the priest didn't want to be contaminated by someone who was unclean. And then the priest was followed a little later by a Levite who thought, well, he's not in my group either, and the Levite passed by on the other side. Jesus continued the story. But a certain Samaritan. Now that conjures up all sorts of thoughts, because Samaritans were originally Jews. The province of Samaria was just north of the province of Judea. Samaritans were Jews who intermarried with non-Jews who came from the conquest of Babylon. And so the most despicable thing a full-blooded Jew was for somebody to defile the uniqueness of being Jewish by intermarrying with a Gentile. That was like the bottom of the barrel for them. So a good Jew would not even enter a Gentile house. They wouldn't eat food cooked by a Gentile or even use a Gentile utensil. And so the priest and the Levite didn't see this man lying beside the road as a neighbor. But here's the kicker: the despised and the hated Samaritan did. And he bound up his wounds, treated him with oil and wine, set him on his wheels, brought him to a holiday inn, and took care of him. He paid the bill and told the innkeeper, take care of him, I'll cover it. And so then Jesus tells that parable and he asks this question: which of these men was a neighbor to this man in need? And the lawyer, to his credit, said, he that showed mercy on him. And the Samaritan, ding, 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 he was the right answer. And then Jesus said, go and do likewise. And so Jesus expanded the definition of neighbor to include everybody. Now precisely, technically, according to that parable, neighbor is defined as anyone who shows mercy to someone in need. And I'm convinced that story just blew the minds of the Jewish religious leaders. A hated Samaritan was the neighbor to this man in need, who was a complete stranger. But see, here's the real point. Everyone is your neighbor. Love everyone, no exceptions. See, the tradition of the Jews said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But the teaching of Jesus was entirely different. Kingdom character doesn't hate at all. It doesn't even hate enemies. Love your neighbor as yourself. That means we're to love everyone. Because all people, all humans, are image bearers. We've all been created in the image of God, and God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son. God loves everybody. So that's the standard we're called to. And when Jesus says, love your enemies, that was a shocking statement in a society in which Jesus lived because there was so much hate. To love a stranger you don't know, that's admirable. But to love someone who hates you, are you kidding me? That's impossible. I read of a native tribe in the South Pacific who had around their huts special articles hanging around the roof of the hut. And a visitor asked, what are those? And they replied, they're reminders. Reminders of what? Reminders of injury. When anybody injures us or anybody does something against us, we have a token of that injury there so that we will remember every time we've been wronged. And none is ever removed until full vengeance is gained. See, that's pretty much the story of the human race. The Pharisees and the scribes were proud and prejudicial. In fact, they were racist. They were hateful, masquerading under the guise of being religious. And Jesus annihilates that in one statement. Love your enemies. They hated the publicans, who were the tax collectors. They despised the Gentiles. And Jesus gives them a simple command that lays all that bare. So here's the deal. The word neighbor is big enough to encompass an enemy. And so when Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself, that included enemies. Who was the neighbor of the man who had been mugged? The Samaritan, the one who was considered an enemy, was the neighbor of that man in need. And so if you're trying to figure out who your neighbor is, you've missed the point. Be a neighbor to everybody. It means to love everybody the same, whether they be friend or foe. So, maybe we need to define what love is all about. Because our culture defines love as a feeling, an emotion. But the word used here, and you've heard it before probably, is the word agapao. And it's a word that looks to the highest good for other people. That's what it means to love. You want what is best for someone else. It's not necessarily emotional, but it is a no-strings kind of a love that flows from grace and mercy. And here's the deal. In the Bible, love is always equated with action. It's not just a feeling. It's more than an emotion. It's not enough to feel something and then remain passive. Biblical love is active. The Samaritan just didn't feel badly for the injured victim along the side of the road. He did something constructive. So we are to love not just in terms of having a warm feeling, but in terms of serving. Romans 12, verse 20 elaborates on this. If your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. See, that's how you treat an enemy. If he's hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him a drink. In doing this, you'll keep burning coals on his head, and I think that basically what that means is I take that to mean you'll bring conviction upon him to make him feel badly about his hatred and sin. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. In other words, when somebody does evil to you, don't retaliate. Overcome that evil with your goodness. And then Jesus continues, pray for those who persecute you. And again, if we love them, that means we're asking God for their highest good. Because, full disclosure, when somebody does me wrong, I'm tempted to pray for them, all right, as in God smite them, But that's not how we're supposed to pray for those who oppose us. Charles Spurgeon said, prayer is the forerunner of mercy. And when we pray, we release God's mercy. To love our enemies is to desire their highest good. And to pray for those who persecute us is to beseech God on their behalf. See, and Jesus doesn't allow us any loopholes here. Pray for your persecutors, the very ones who would take your life. Pray for them. Jesus' original audience would have understood this to refer particularly to the Romans, who are their oppressors. They're to love them by praying for their Roman oppressors. Now, if you think about it, such a love is nothing short of supernatural. But see, what would happen if we began to pray for the people who are set against us? Praying what? Well, my favorite prayer to pray for people is Ephesians 3:19, that they would know more of the love of Christ. And it will wash your soul to pray like that. When people come to me and they say, well, Pastor, I've got a problem with Joe Dokes. I resent this particular person. And my response is, well, here's a thought. Why don't you pray for that person? Set aside a specific time every day and pray for that person. You know what invariably happens? It begins to wash that soul of bitterness when you pray for somebody and ask God to be merciful. Matthew 5, verse 45, Jesus continues, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to shine, to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. So why do we love our enemies? Why pray for those who oppose us? Mark Twain said, love your enemies, it'll drive them crazy. Well, that's not the real reason we're to love our enemies. The reason Jesus gives is this, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. The Bible says that God is love. And it follows that if God is love, and I'm his child, then that's how I'm to be characterized, is by love. And so Jesus isn't saying, if you just muster up enough love, you can get yourself into heaven. That's not what it's about. His point is, you'll provide proof of the validity of your claim that you're a child of God when love is manifested in your life. You'll prove who you belong to by how you love. See, we're never going to convince anybody that we belong to God unless we're like him, and he is love. On June 19th, 1865, Union soldiers landed at Galveston, Texas, providing news that the slaves were now free and the Civil War had ended. Now, that was the last of the enslaved people to be notified of the Emancipation Proclamation, which had been signed more than 2.5 years previously. So to this day, it's known as June 19th, Freedom Day or Jubilee Day or Liberation Day. Now, slavery ended, but unfortunately, racism did not. And as the body of Christ, it's important that we speak out against the evil of racism because the ground at the foot of the cross is level. We're all image bearers of God in need of a Savior. My youngest daughter is married to Stephen. They were both on staff at YWAM. They met in North Africa. She had malaria. He nursed her back to health, and one thing led to another, and they got married. Now, I don't typically recommend that as a way to meet your future spouse. But Stephen is from Sudan, and they have 2 of the cutest grandchildren on the planet. They were missionaries in Tanzania, but returned from the field a year ago, September, and they now live under my roof. My house has a downstairs apartment. But here's the deal. She has a 6-year-old son who is autistic. And she's afraid, she is terrified, that he could be a victim of police violence in the future. See, as a young man of color, she doesn't feel safe for his sake. Now, I don't debate that with her because I want to listen with empathy. I want to say, okay, that's how she feels. And it's appropriate for us as believers to work for racial justice. Because the truth is, so many of our brothers and sisters of color do not feel safe. And things need to change, but the first step that we can take is empathy. Listen for understanding. It's just good manners. It's a tangible way we can let our brothers and sisters know that we care. Circling back to the story of the Good Samaritan, the striking thing is that the Samaritan demonstrated empathy. And empathy begins when we place ourselves in someone else's pain. And sharing someone else's pain allows us to taste what God did for us when he came as a human and endured the cross. And when we choose to experience what someone else is going through, that's when we can show compassion. So I want to take a break just for 1 second, and I want to pray for empathy. So would you join me as I pray for empathy? God, our world is broken, but this didn't stop you from showing your great love for us by sending your Son to empathize with us in our weakness. Help us to do likewise. Help me to view everyone I interact with the way that you see them. Allow me to be a part of your solution to the brokenness of this world. Show me how to partner with you in creating sustainable change. I recognize that in order to do that, I need to be willing to share in the pain of others. And give me the courage to do that and the wisdom to take action. Let empathy and restoration start with me. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, Jesus continues. He says, God causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and he sends his rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. So first, Jesus talks about evil and good, and then he inverts it and mentions righteous and unrighteous. And the point here is impartiality. Jesus inverts the order just to show that God loves everybody. When the sun comes up and shines its beauty and warmth, it's for everyone. And when the rain falls, it's for everybody. So what Jesus is saying is, be like your Father. Let your love be so indiscriminate that your sun shines on everybody and your rain falls on the righteous and the unrighteous. So conclusion is this. And you already know this, but God loves and cares for everyone. Note to self, the reason we are to love our enemies is not that they might become our friends. That'd be amazing if it happened, but it's not guaranteed. But that's not the reason that Jesus gives for loving our enemies. We love our enemies because it manifests the character of God. It's the right thing to do. Jesus continues in verse 46. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? See, if you just go around and love people in your group, what is the big deal about that? If you just love other people who agree with you and think like you and belong to your group, are you going to be commended? It's a rhetorical question. Jesus answers it by asking another question. Are not even tax collectors doing that? Now, those who heard these original words must have gone into cardiac arrest when he said that. See, if there's anybody they hated, it was the tax collectors. Why? Because they were viewed as traitors. They were Jews who'd betrayed Israel by lining their own pockets, working with the Roman government to extort from the people. You know, they collect as many taxes as they could to pad their own pockets. And if you think that was a blow, what Jesus says next was even worse. And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? See, there's only one thing worse than a tax collector. That was a Gentile. See, Jesus doesn't sugarcoat it here. When he told them that they were no better than tax collectors and Gentiles, he was telling them what they didn't want to hear. And he asked, what are you doing more than others? See, this is a devastating indictment. The religious superstars are no better than pagans. Priests who serve in the temple are no better than people who extort. Oswald Sanders said, the master expects from his disciples such conduct as can be explained only in terms of the supernatural. See, we're called to love everybody. Matthew 5:48. Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Now, if you're like me, that kind of throws you for a loop. I mean, it jolted me. I mean, I'm used to doing my best, trying hard, taking baby steps. We can all relate to that. But be perfect, just like God is perfect? Oh, is that all? See, a proper response is, that's impossible. Exactly. Obeying the Sermon on the Mount in our own strength is not even in the realm of possibility. But the great truth is that when we become followers of Christ, we're not left to ourselves. We now have the Holy Spirit living inside of us. And Jesus releases his power to live a righteousness that would be impossible otherwise. We can't do it on our own, but the good news is we don't have to. The point is this, we're to be like God. Be perfect. Now, I can't be perfect. I fall short of being perfect every day, and that's why I need a Savior. And when we come to Christ, we are then given his nature. See, a follower of Jesus is not someone who keeps the Sermon on the Mount. A follower of Jesus is someone who knows he can't keep it and comes to Jesus for forgiveness of sin, the sin of falling short, and then is given the power to live these principles. That's the point of the message. Even when you fail, you're forgiven because Christ has paid the price for your sin. See, if you don't love like this, that's sin. And if you're a sinner, you need a Savior. Jesus Christ will come in and forgive you of your sin of lovelessness. He'll cleanse your life and he'll plant his love in your heart. And then he can teach you to love the way that he does. Now, for some here, this might be a call to salvation. For others, it's an encouragement to let the love that's there flow. See, the Jewish leaders thought that they were so spiritual because they thought they had the law dialed in. But Jesus said that love fulfills the law. Take the Ten Commandments, for example. The first half, the first 5, are all about God. If you love God, you won't break those. The second half of the Ten Commandments are all about people. If you love others, you're not going to break those. love is the fulfillment of the whole law. Now, see, I don't have a sign in my kitchen that says, rule number 1, don't swear at your wife. Rule number 2, don't be rude, dude. Number 3, answer her when she talks to you. Number 4, leave the toilet seat down. Number 5, empty the silverware from the dishwasher. I don't need a list of rules. Why? There's just one. That is, love my wife like Christ loves the church. See, I don't need a list of rules because love controls the relationship. See, and here's the truth. If God didn't love his enemies, there'd be no hope for any of us. None of us would be Christians. Romans 5 verse 10 says, when we were God's enemies, we were reconciled to him through the death of his Son. So we were enemies, Paul says, but God loved us anyway. Love is God's default setting. But his love is more than a feeling. We are separated from God, and he took the initiative and sent his one and only Son to die on a cross that we might have life in relationship with him. See, as children of God, we are now trophies of his grace, and we are to love the way God does. Dr. Martin Luther King put it this way, darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. See, what God wants is that we love him and we love others. No exceptions. And we love because God first loved us. So the place to begin in being a loving person is to receive the love of God. You can't give away what you don't have. Let God love you, and then you can love him. Make loving God your number one priority. Your relationship with God is going to last forever. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and love people. No exceptions. Let's pray. God, I thank you for your grace and your goodness, and especially your love. Let us, who are made in your image, also do your will by loving others on this planet. Give us the strength and the wisdom to do that. We ask in Christ's name. Amen.
Higher than the mountains that I face, stronger than the power of the grave, constant in the trials and the change. One thing remains. One thing remains. Your love never fails, never gives up, never runs out on me. Your love never fails, never gives up, never runs out on me. Your love never fails, never gives up, never runs out on me. Your love. On and on and on and on it goes. It overwhelms and satisfies my soul. Never ever have to be afraid. One thing remains. One thing remains. Your love never fails, never gives up, never runs out on me. Your love never fails, never gives up, never never fails.